The alarm on my wrist device started counting down from 6 hours, and I knew that once it hit 0, I would never see my daughters again. I am Mira Tarek, first matriarch of Clan Tarek, and for 7 years, I had been told the same sentence by every official in the Cartel Assembly. Once collateral kin cross into holding space, recovery is not possible. This is policy. This is final. I had learned to hate that word, final, the way other people learn to hate a sickness. It sat in my chest every single day since my twin daughters, Sael and Alira, were taken as payment for a debt neither of them had ever agreed to. 6 hours. That was how long I had before the cartel processing station on the trade ring of Corvassa finished registering my daughters into their permanent labor ledger. Once a name entered that ledger, it could never be removed. Not by law, not by money, not by begging. I had begged before. I had learned exactly how far begging gets you, which is nowhere. I was standing on the observation deck of a rented transport, watching the distant lights of Corvassa station glimmer like a slow, patient predator, when my communicator lit up with a message from a name I did not recognize. Owen Blake, independent cargo pilot, docked at Bay 11, says it is about your daughters. My hands were shaking before I even opened the channel. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to a young human man with tired eyes and a jacket that looked like it had been through more trouble than most soldiers see in a lifetime. He did not waste time on greetings. "You are the mother," he said. "The one with the twins on the Corvassa ledger." I told him yes. And I told him the clock, because there was no time left for anything else. He nodded once, like a man doing quick math in his head, and said the words that changed everything. "Then we have 6 hours to break their paperwork, before their paperwork breaks your daughters." I did not understand him yet. I would understand him very soon. Owen Blake was not a soldier, and he was not a diplomat, and he was certainly not someone the Assembly would have expected to walk into their station and change the fate of 2 Ventari children. He was, in his own words, a man who owed money to people who did not accept apologies as payment, and who had taken a job 3 weeks earlier to move a sealed shipment through cartel space without asking questions. He told me later that he almost did not open the seal. It was against every rule of the job, but something about the crate had felt wrong to him, a small sound from inside that no ordinary cargo should make, and human curiosity, it turns out, does not care very much about rules written by other people. Inside, he found my daughters. Sael, with her crest feathers already dulled to gray from stress, looked at him and said, in broken trade tongue, "You are supposed to deliver us, not talk to us." He told me that sentence was the exact moment he decided he was not delivering anything to anyone. But deciding is not the same as doing, and Corvassa Station was not going to simply hand 2 labor assets back because one human pilot had a change of heart. The moment he resealed the crate and reported a delay, the cartel processing office moved the registration deadline forward, suspicious that something had gone wrong with their shipment. That gave us 6 hours instead of 6 days. We met in person on the transport deck outside Bay 11, both of us moving fast, both of us aware that every minute we spent talking was a minute we were not spending finding a way through the station's defenses of paperwork and procedure. "Listen carefully," Owen said, walking quickly beside me toward the station's outer ring. "I read every page of that shipping contract twice while I was flying here. There is a clause buried in Assembly Trade Law, Section 4, Subsection 12. Any cargo transferred without the proper carrier seal from the original point of debt is legally classified as misrouted. Misrouted cargo has to be returned to its point of origin, no exceptions, no negotiation, at the expense of whoever caused the misroute." I stared at him, my heart pounding with something I had not felt in 7 years, something dangerously close to hope. "You broke the seal," I said slowly. "I broke the seal," he said. "Which means on paper, your daughters are not registered cargo anymore. They are an error, and errors have to be corrected by law." It sounded too simple. 7 years of lawyers and negotiators, and desperate offers, had taught me that nothing involving the Cartel Assembly was ever simple. But we did not have time to doubt him. We had 5 hours and 40 minutes, and a station full of officials who had no reason to help us, and every reason to stop us. The inside of Corvassa Station was a maze of corridors, lit in a cold blue light, filled with the constant hum of processing terminals and the low murmur of 100 different species arguing over debts, contracts, and cargo. Owen moved through it like a man who had spent years learning how bureaucracies worked, and I realized quickly that this was exactly what he had spent years doing, not fighting battles, but fighting paperwork, arguing with debt collectors of his own, back on human worlds where systems were built to grind ordinary people down. We reached the registration office with 5 hours remaining, and the administrator behind the counter, a narrow-faced cartel official named Doran Vex, looked at us the way a locked door looks at someone without a key. "I need to file a misroute correction," Owen said, sliding a data chip across the counter. Section 4, subsection 12. This shipment was transferred without a valid carrier seal from origin. Doran Vex did not even glance at the chip. "That regulation has not been invoked in over 2 centuries, he said. "It is effectively obsolete." "Obsolete does not mean repealed," Owen said calmly. "It is still active assembly law. I would be happy to file a formal complaint with the Trade Tribunal if you would prefer to argue that point in front of them instead of me." The mention of the Trade Tribunal made something shift behind the administrator's eyes. The tribunal meant public record. Public record meant the cartel's own violation of an old but active law would be visible to every trading partner they had. It was the one thing an organization built on quiet, private control could not afford. Even so, he stalled. He said the paperwork would take time to verify. He said the shipment records were sealed under a different department. He said 100 small things designed to eat away at the clock ticking down on my wrist. 4 hours remained when a second official arrived, a taller woman with sharp eyes who introduced herself only as a compliance officer. She looked at Owen the way a predator looks at something it has not decided yet whether to eat or ignore. "You understand," she said, "that filing a false misroute claim carries serious penalties for the filer." "It is not false," Owen said. "I have the flight logs, the seal records, and the timestamp showing the crate was opened after transfer, not before. Everything lines up exactly the way the law describes. If you want to argue otherwise, I welcome it in front of the tribunal, on record, with full documentation." She did not answer immediately. Instead, she left the room, presumably to consult someone higher in the chain, and the silence she left behind was heavier than anything I had felt in 7 years of silence. 3 hours and 20 minutes remained. That was when a third figure entered the room, and I felt the temperature of the conversation shift immediately. He introduced himself as Colton Reeve, a senior auditor from the station's records division, and he did not bother pretending to be neutral. He looked at Owen's data chip for a long moment, then set it down on the counter with a small, deliberate click. "This regulation you are citing," he said, "was written for a different era of trade. It was designed for physical goods, not for living individuals. I do not believe it applies here." Owen did not flinch. "Show me the line in the statute that makes that distinction," he said. "I read it 3 times on the way here. It says cargo. It does not say goods. It does not exclude anything based on what the cargo happens to be. If you believe there is a distinction, I would genuinely like to see where it is written, because right now, it looks like you are inventing a rule that does not exist, in order to avoid following one that does." Colton Reeves' jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might simply refuse and end the conversation there, station security standing close enough behind him to make the threat unspoken but obvious. Instead, he asked for a moment to consult the original statute text himself, and he left the room carrying Owen's data chip with him. The 2 officials who remained did not speak to us while we waited. I stood beside Owen in that cold blue light, watching the numbers on my wrist device fall past 3 hours, and I asked him the question that had been building in my chest since Bay 11. "What happens if he comes back and says no?" I asked. "What happens if there is no tribunal, no audit, nothing left to threaten them with, and they simply refuse?" Owen was quiet for a moment before answering. "Then we keep going," he said. "There is always another angle, in a system built on rules. Rules are just decisions someone wrote down once. If one door closes, I start looking for the door they forgot to lock." It was not a comforting answer. Not exactly, but there was something steady in the way he said it. Something that made the ticking numbers on my wrist feel slightly less like a countdown to disaster, and more like a countdown to a fight we still had a chance of winning. Colton Reeve returned 11 minutes later, and this time he did not meet Owen's eyes directly. "The wording is broader than I expected," he admitted. "It is technically applicable. I am forwarding the claim to the compliance office for formal review." It was not an apology. It was not even close to one, but it was enough. And in that station, on that day, enough was everything. I asked Owen quietly why he was doing this. He was not from my world. He had no debt to me, no bond, nothing that should have made two frightened children on a cargo manifest matter to a human pilot running from his own troubles. He looked at me for a long moment before answering. "Where I come from," he said, "there is a kind of person who tells you something is impossible just because it has never been done before. And there is another kind of person who hears the word impossible and treats it like a challenge instead of an answer. I have spent my whole life being the second kind, mostly because I was too stubborn to be anything else. I did not fully understand that answer then. I understand it completely now." 3 hours remained when the compliance officer returned, this time with a cartel enforcement escort standing behind her, tall figures in dark uniforms whose presence was meant to make us feel small and outmatched. She informed us that the registration process for the two labor assets in question could not be halted without authorization from a regional director, and that the regional director was currently unavailable. Owen did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply asked one question. Is the regional director unavailable, or is the regional director avoiding a decision that will look very bad on record if my daughters, if these two individuals, complete registration while a formal misroute claim is pending? The compliance officer's expression flickered, just slightly, and I understood in that moment that Owen had found the exact seam where their confidence was weakest. Cartel officials did not fear a fight. They feared consequences that could be traced back to their own names. 2 hours and 50 minutes remained. She left again. This time she did not come back for almost 40 minutes, and every one of those minutes felt like a small private torment, watching the numbers on my wrist device shrink while my daughters sat somewhere inside that station, unaware that a stranger from a species none of us fully understood was fighting for them with nothing but old regulations and unshaken nerve. When she returned, she brought a different kind of answer. The regional director had reviewed the claim remotely and determined that further registration would be suspended pending a full audit, in accordance with proper procedure. It was not a victory yet. It was a pause. But a pause, after 7 years of nothing but closed doors, felt like the sound of something enormous beginning to move. Owen was not satisfied with a pause. He pressed further, asking for physical access to confirm the identities and condition of the two individuals named in the claim, citing standard verification procedure that any misroute correction required. The compliance officer hesitated, clearly searching for a reason to refuse, and finding none that would hold up if this ever reached a public hearing. 1 hour and 50 minutes remained when we were finally led down a long corridor toward the holding section of the station, past rows of sealed doors that I did not allow myself to look at too closely, because I did not know which ones held people who had never had someone like Owen Blake arrive in time. The door in front of us slid open, and I saw my daughters for the first time in 7 years. Sael's crest feathers had gone almost entirely gray, and Alira had grown taller and thinner than I remembered, her eyes carrying a kind of caution that no child should ever have to learn. For a moment none of us moved, as if the years between us had become a physical wall that none of us knew how to cross. Then Alira said my name, just once, quietly, like she was testing whether it was really true, and the wall broke apart all at once. I will not describe everything that happened in the minutes after that, because some moments are not meant to be turned into a story for anyone else. I will only say that for the first time in 7 years, I held both of my daughters at the same time, and the countdown on my wrist device no longer mattered, because whatever happened next, they were no longer inside that ledger. But the story does not end there, because paperwork, once started, does not simply stop moving. The compliance officer informed us that the suspension was only temporary, and that a full assembly hearing would be required within 30 days to formally close the case, or the registration process would automatically resume from where it had been paused. 30 days sounded like nothing after 7 years, but I had learned not to trust anything the cartel offered without a fight behind it. Owen spent those 30 days the way he had spent the 6 hours before them, refusing to slow down. He gathered flight records, sealed timestamps, and communication logs. He tracked down 2 other pilots who had handled similar misrouted shipments in the past, and convinced them to testify about how rarely the old regulation was ever properly enforced, which strengthened our claim that its neglect had become a pattern of quiet, deliberate abuse rather than simple oversight. He also did something I did not expect. He shared the story publicly, in careful, factual terms, on open trade channels used by independent pilots and merchants across cartel space. He did not exaggerate. He did not dramatize. He simply laid out the timeline exactly as it happened, and let it spread on its own. Within a week, other families with similar stories began reaching out. Families whose kin had been listed as collateral under contracts none of them had truly understood. Families who had also been told the word final by officials who had never once had to prove it. The pressure on the Cartel Assembly grew not because of threats, but because the truth, once it was documented clearly enough, became difficult for them to bury. On the 20th day, Colton Reeve contacted Owen privately, and for a moment, I feared it was another attempt to stall or reverse what had already been decided. Instead, he offered something none of us expected. He agreed to testify at the hearing that the old regulation had been quietly ignored for decades, not because it was unclear, but because enforcing it consistently would have been costly for the Assembly. It was a small act of honesty from a man who had almost stopped us at Bay 11, and it told me something important about how deeply the truth of that 6-hour countdown had already begun to spread. Not everyone welcomed the attention. 2 days before the hearing, the compliance office attempted to introduce a procedural objection, claiming the original claim had been filed outside the correct department and should be dismissed on a technicality. Owen spent that entire night awake, cross-referencing filing records, until he found proof that the department listed as correct had been merged into records 3 years earlier, making their objection impossible to enforce. He submitted the correction at dawn, exhausted but calm, and said only one thing when I asked him if he ever considered giving up. "Giving up was never really an option," he said. "I made a promise to 2 kids in a crate that I did not fully understand the size of at the time. Once you say something like that out loud, backing away from it costs more than finishing it ever will." The hearing itself was almost anticlimactic compared to the 6 hours that had started everything. A panel of Assembly officials reviewed the documentation, confirmed the validity of the old regulation, and ruled that the misroute correction stood. My daughters were formally and permanently removed from the labor ledger. The ruling also noted, quietly but clearly, that similar cases would now be reviewed under the same standard, which meant Owen's stubborn reading of an old, ignored law had cracked open a door that many others could now walk through as well. I offered him everything I could think of afterward: land, mineral rights, a place among Clan Tarek with more honor than most outsiders ever receive. He refused almost all of it, gently, the way someone refuses a gift they know they cannot properly explain how to accept. "I did not do anything special," he told me one final time, before he returned to his own ship to continue whatever ordinary, difficult life he had been living before all of this began. "I just read something nobody else bothered to read, and then I refused to accept the first answer they gave me. That is not heroism. That is just stubbornness with good timing." I disagreed with him then, and I disagree with him now. I have lived for centuries, buried people I loved, negotiated with more officials than I can count, and never once, in all that time, did I see anyone treat the word impossible as nothing more than an inconvenience to be argued past. Owen Blake did exactly that, not with weapons, not with threats, but with patience, precision, and a refusal to let a deadline decide the fate of 2 children he had never met before opening a crate he was not supposed to open. My daughters are home now. Sale's crest feathers are slowly returning to their natural gold. Illyra laughs more easily each season, though there are still nights when I hear her wake suddenly, and I sit with her until the fear passes. Some wounds take longer to heal than others, but they are healing, because they finally have the safety and the time to do it. Every year, on the day the door to that holding cell finally opened, Clan Tarek sets an empty chair at the head of our gathering table. Owen never stays long enough to sit in it. He always says he is not the kind of person who is comfortable being thanked. that he would rather just know the people he helped are doing well, and leave it at that. But the chair stays there anyway, every single year, because some debts are not measured in money, and some promises are not kept with weapons or power, but with nothing more than 6 hours, an old forgotten law, and one person who refused to believe that final ever truly meant final.